none other than a Le Mans 24-hour winner, 3-time podium sitter in Formula One, multiple IndyCar wins, a foray into the BTCC, now sporting director of a British touring car team, a gentleman, a businessman, and ladies and gentlemen, he's also a biker. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legend that is Mark Blundell. I think I might have got a bit over the top. Morning, Mark.
Morning.
How are you, fella? You all right?
I think I'm okay. Like everybody else in the world, locked down, and yeah, it's different, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you know, it's needs must, I guess. We're all sort of in the same boat, as it were, different varying shapes of boat. And that's why we started this club, Mark, to be honest, to unite anybody that was particularly on their own and feeling a little bit lonesome and wanting to have a chat and connect. So it started as a sort of 5-10 minute chat. Now it's kind of turned into a half-an-hour show, really. But thanks for popping along. You're very welcome. I can't see you, but what sort of state is your face in? Because a lot of men are just growing the old beards at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, actually, I've got sun coming into my office. That's why it's a bit difficult. It's probably a little bit shadowed in the room. Yeah, I've got the Captain Birdseye beard. Okay. Plenty of grey coming through. I guess that's sort of normal at 50 plus. And I've got the COVID cut. Yeah, the clippers.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm looking like a veteran SAS guy, I guess. Maybe
That's
not.
not such a bad thing, is it? That
Yeah.
sounds
Maybe
all
that's
right to me.
an exaggeration, Suzi, that.
Okay, just a mild one. I'd like to talk a little bit about your career, but should we go back to front? Shall we start with what you're doing now?
What am I doing now? Yeah, today is like any other day, looking after the lives of our managed racing drivers. So we're very fortunate. We've got a number of guys on our books. Several guys that people might know of if they're into motorsport: Gary Paffett, Mike Conway, Tom Blomqvist, Callum Ilott, top guys. Not in the Formula One pit lane yet. Callum Ilott is a possibility. He's looking strong if we get an F2 season underway this year. But that's part and parcel of the day. And then we've got a little agency that does a lot of corporate work, events. We have a great little partner program, over 25 corporate clients. And also a little bit of involvement still with the British Touring Car Championship with our MB Motorsport team. Yeah,
still waiting for obviously some motorsport to happen somewhere in the world. But let's go back to your career then, particularly in F1, which sort of went up and down, really, didn't it? It was a bit of a roller coaster ride. But is it fair to say that it was Frank Williams and Patrick Head that gave you your opportunity to start with Williams?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I started out as a test driver, probably the first generation of test driver. And that test role really set me up to get into Formula One. I was doing F3000 at the time, which is the equivalent of F2, World Sports Car Championship. And I was led down the pathway by a guy called John McDonald, actually, who in his former life was a Formula One team owner with the Ram team. And he was running a Middlebridge team, which was F3000 at the time, and basically said, look, we need to take you down to Frank. We need to see whether there's a position for you. It was one of those meetings that, you know, as a youngster, you sit there and you see this sort of God in front of you, who, you know, you feel that might be able to give you an opportunity. And you say, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. He did most of the talking. I did most of the listening. But I came out there with a test contract, a 3-year agreement, actually, which was at the time sort of unheard of, and a little bit of money, which also was unheard of. So, yeah, a salaried test driver. Whoa.
What can you tell us? Oh, it's windy here. What can you tell us about when you first jumped into that F1 car? I mean, obviously it was a test, it was a sort of straight line test, I don't know, but what is it that separates for you a Formula One car to any other car? I'm just being completely rained on by leaves, weirdly here, Mark. But tell us if you can just transport us into that Williams car with you.
Well, actually, it was a straight line test. It was not far from Didcot from the factory, and we did some aerodynamic testing, which is pretty much actually most of the guys when they get their first run in an F1 car is what they get up to. Not exactly the most glamorous thing in the world, but when you're a youngster, sort of targeting F1 and you get in one of those cars for the first time, it is what it is. It's the pinnacle of motorsport. I'm sure it's like on two wheels with MotoGP when you get on a MotoGP bike. They are the most pure of machinery. Every input has an output. The finesse of it is, quite impressive. I think more than anything that struck me when I first got in a Formula One car was not necessarily the speed, because in many ways I'd already been quicker in other machinery, but it was the stopping power.
Right.
Just the capability of being able to sort of jump on the brakes and stop with the amount of downforce you had, and actually telling yourself that it can do far more than what you imagined. And that, I think, is probably, if you talk to most F1 guys, that's probably the most impressive thing about a Formula One car.
Yeah. And there was some, it always strikes me with you in your Formula One career that there was some kind of sliding door moments if you'd made a sort of slightly different decision. I mean, I'm probably mainly talking about the Brabham thing and obviously Damon coming in and, becoming world champion. I mean, just sort of summarize that story for us.
It's really easy, Susie. It's basically, if you did the opposite of what I decided to do at the time, you would have been world champion. But
yeah.
I was one of those guys who I got to F1 on merit, and I'm eternally grateful for that. But at the end of the day, I didn't have anybody around me to, I had family, obviously, but we had no motorsport experience. We had no understanding of what was going on. And we got to F1 pretty quickly. I started racing in 1984. I was on a motocross bike at a schoolboy level and jumped off of one of those, got into Formula 4 1600 in 84. And by 1989, I was testing a Williams Formula One car. Very quick. Not so much this day and age, but back then, incredibly fast transition. But I didn't have anyone around to guide me and tell me, what the future could hold. And my best decision was going to Williams and taking the role as test driver. My worst decision, because I was doing such a good job, was to actually jump at the first opportunity that came my way with Brabham and get myself a Formula One seat, because I still had another year of my contract at Williams, and the chances are that there'd have been me sitting in a Williams, not another guy called Damon Hill, who actually is a very good friend. And I was the guy who called him and said, Damon, I'm leaving to go to Brabham, and you should get on the phone to Frank and go and get yourself a seat. He never did pay me a commission on that. I was in management.
Oh, he's still there?
Yeah, still here.
Okay. It is an extraordinary story, and I think almost salt being rubbed into the wound further. Didn't you test that car, the Williams car as well, that year, while you were driving for Brabham, so you knew what you were missing out on?
Yeah, I kind of unheard of, Susie, back then even, and also today would never happen. But I was invited to go back to Williams while I was a Grand Prix driver at Brabham under contract. Williams contacted me and said, look, we'd love you to come back and test our car again. They wanted a little bit of insight and understanding. So Brabham released me because, they needed to understand what was going on with the Grand Prix winning car. I went to Imola after the Grand Prix, and that's really when the penny dropped, how big a mistake I'd made, because I went round Imola 2.2 seconds faster in the Williams on race tyres than what I did on qualifying tyres in the Brabham. And you then think to yourself, oh, yeah, okay, the driver has some input, but the biggest percentage of performance is the car, and that has basically been underlined to me right now. So, it was great to go back to Williams. It gave me a little bit of an understanding, and that really was already the decision made for me that I didn't want to stay at Brabham. And I got to the end of that season and took the opportunity to go back and test for Mclaren. I just needed to be in better machinery.
Yeah, and where do you stand on that synopsis of Formula One now, in terms of, how much is the machinery and how much is the input from the driver?
I think the split is probably a little bit smaller now, in terms of, I think probably, from my side of things, I look at it and I think there's probably a 20% driver input, maybe 25%, and the rest of it is machinery. Back in my day, it was probably like 30%. So it's still very heavily led on performance by the machine. And, for me, people say, oh, well, drivers make the big difference. They make a small difference. But the tenths and the thousandths of a second are the difference that is the winning margin. But if you want to use like an analogy, it's like a race-winning jockey sitting on an old nag. You know, it doesn't matter how good a jockey they are, they're not going to make that old nag go and get past the post first. It's they need to have a great horse and a great jockey, and that combination will probably win by an extra length, so to speak. But I mean, at the end of the day, machinery is still the biggest factor.
And how do you rate Lewis?
Lewis is a remarkable guy. I mean, you know, if you took him as a piece of software, he's probably like version 8.2 or something by now. I mean, how good is he? But yeah, it's quite funny. You know, we're local. Lewis is a Hertfordshire guy, and I'm sort of in the neck of the woods there as well. And actually, when I was, you know, in Formula One, I presented Lewis with one of his first trophies at a small kart circuit called Nut Hampstead in Hertfordshire, and sent him a note, actually, because obviously a local family sent me a letter afterwards saying, look, how impressed I was with him, and one day he'll be in Formula One like I was. You know, little did I know I'd get a letter back, you know, several years later saying that he'd gone one better and won a world championship. But yeah. There you go. No, fantastic guy. Credit to motorsport, huge achievements, and a joy to watch on the circuit. He does some remarkable things.
That's a really lovely story about the cup and the letter. I always think that he doesn't get the credit that he deserves, actually, considering his achievements. But hey ho, let's see what happens. I'm going to ask you a question that people always ask me, Mark. When do you think we will see a lady driving in Formula One? And have you seen any talent coming through?
Well, you know, a female in Formula One is not new. It's you know, we've had female drivers before. Even back in my Brabham days, we had an Italian lady, Giovanna Amati. So she was back then. Obviously, we've had Danica Patrick in the US, who's been very competitive. I think, honestly, now, I think probably, because for me, the biggest thing that's been the hurdle to jump has probably been the physical factor. Because back when there was no power steering and the cars were quite sort of aggressive to drive, I think just a pure physicality between a male and a female, there just wasn't quite there enough for the duration to sort of get that edge there. And I think now with the modern day cars with power steering, they're a little bit easier to drive physically. And I think that's also given a little bit more bandwidth for a female driver to come in. Nothing to do with the ability. I think that's there. Personally, I actually managed a fantastic lady called Maria de Villa. Maria unfortunately lost her life a few years ago in a Formula One testing accident, but Maria was destined to go into the pit lane in Formula One. She had a huge amount of ability, and great support behind her. But I don't think it's too far away. I think there's a number of drivers now, female drivers, that are coming through the ranks in motorsport. Even in our touring car team, we have a female test driver, Esme Hawkey, young female who's got immense talent, and I'm sure she's going to go on to big and great things.
And we've got the W Series, haven't we, which is showcasing female talent, which is kind of being spearheaded by David Coulthard, which is interesting, watching the likes of Alice Powell and those girls coming through. And you know, I hope that we'll see some girls in the cars sooner rather than later. Just flicking back, in fact, I'm just going to have a quick look at any questions, because it's not just about me asking you questions. It's lovely chatting with you. Jamie Chadwick, yeah, absolutely. She's a great talent. I'm struggling with this phone. If you can throw any questions at me that anybody's asking.
A lot of people asking, what's it like to drive at night in Le Mans?
Oh, okay. Le Mans, racing at night, Mark, if you would.
Racing at night. It's like driving at night in a normal situation. It is a little bit more difficult because, especially when you get into that stages that you've probably done, you know, a good sort of 10, 12 hours of driving as a team, and you've contributed towards that. And then you get to the nighttime period. Le Mans itself, and some people don't really get the understanding of it, but it's not very well lit. I mean, the national roads, it gets closed down for the circuit to go race on. But there's several areas where there's very poor lighting. So lighting on the car is critical. At the same time, it's quite difficult to judge the speeds. And I think that's probably the biggest problem with endurance races these days, especially something like Daytona and Le Mans. you've got such a big difference in speed differential between some of the cars. You know, an LMP1 car could be doing a good 40 miles an hour more on the Mulsanne straight. And when you throw in darkness and then maybe a tad of rain and fog, it's not always easy to predict where a car is going to be, whether it's going to be down the inside of you or you're going to be able to slip down the inside of that. So, yeah, driving at night is a test. And it does drain you a little bit physically and mentally because it's quite tiring. But you know, the twilight zone is the perfect point. Just when you get in the car and the sun's going down, the circuit's still got its grip and its heat that's been built up over the day, and you've still got a bit of moisture in the air. And at that point, that's the ideal time to go qualifying, actually. So that's when you get that little opportunity to go and stick the best lap in possible.
Mark, I think the first... Oh, hang on. Geordie Lodger looks like he's
Yes.
going to...
I've got a question here from Junior Blundell.
Julia Blundell. Junior Blundell.
Yes, is that any relation?
Okay.
Says, how would you feel if your grandchildren went into motor racing? Question mark.
Yeah, that's my oldest son.
Is it? Okay. So you have to answer the question now. How would you feel?
Oh, that would be tough. That's our newest grandchild, Heath Blundell. Oh, I don't know. That's a really tough one. I'm really torn on that. I would be the most supportive, energetic granddad in the paddock. I'd also
and the most scared.
Yes, exactly that. So maybe to answer his question, I can tell him now, no, I am not funding my grandson's racing program.
I think that's probably where it was going, really, wasn't it? Mark, I think the first time, well, certainly the first time that we worked together, I was at Rockingham covering the IndyCar, covering kart when it came to the UK. Am I right in thinking that? Because it was on the BBC and you were our sort of resident expert, and we went there and covered that for the Beeb. So just take us back to your days on oval races, and can you just put us in the car with you and tell us how the experience is?
You know, oval racing is a completely different discipline to anything else in motorsport, and I chuckle sometimes when some guys go like, "Oh, it's easy." You know, let me tell you, it is far from easy. The 2 mile super speedway, somewhere like Fontana in California, you're covering that. In my generation, when we had 900 horsepower, you were doing that in 30 seconds. So 2 miles, 30 seconds. 253 miles an hour top speed, 227 in the corner, and 500 miles to go. So, you know, incredibly difficult. The biggest thing for me was actually understanding how the car worked, and I say that because when you're a road racer, you're always trying to get your car as low as possible to the ground. You're trying to actually, you know, generate as much mechanical grip and get your aerodynamic efficiency there. And when you get onto an oval, it's a weird sensation because the faster you go, the further the car gets pushed down onto the circuit. And at one point, it starts to hit the surface. And then it takes away the steering and it gets a little bit unsettled on the aerodynamics. So you go quick, you come back in and you lift the car. Completely opposite to what you would normally do. And that's a really weird feeling because it's completely against the grain of what you've learned over all those years. And the other thing as well is slipstreaming, because it takes on a new dimension. You could come off a turn 4 and have over half a mile straight to travel, and you'd pick up a tow from turn 4 going into the guy with turn 1. And it's almost like being in a small little aircraft. You know, if you sat in a little 4-seater plane and you're being buffeted around, that's the sensation you get in a race car, which is kind of eerie because when you're sitting with 2 or 3 guys around you at 220 in a corner, and your steering starts to go and about 25% of it is in no man's land, your backside calibrates to the same as that, and it's not a great feeling. And as I say, there's no small accidents on ovals. They don't exist. They're always big ones.
You described that so brilliantly. It blows my mind when I watch it, and you know, covered it over the years, and it's just extraordinary. So is the concentration, I think you'll understand what I mean by this question, is the concentration different when you're racing on an oval to when you're racing in a Formula One car in any sense?
There's it's an interesting question. Firstly, I'll just back up on what you just said. I only went to watch on the outside of an oval once. And when I saw what was going on with the cars and saw the tyre bent underneath the rim at 220 miles an hour, I walked away and said I'll never go and watch it again. So that gives you the impression as well of a driver being scared before he gets back in his car. The other thing is concentration levels. Yeah, what I would say, Suzi, is that, like, you know, say 500 miles, you know, I know when I did Fontana and I won that in 97, that race was 3 hours and 15 minutes long. That's a long time to be in a race car, and it's a long time to be at maximum concentration. And I guess the problem is, you know, say you're looking at your computer screen and you're there for a couple of hours. If you take your eyes off of it for a while, it's no big deal. You're not going to hit anything. If you do that when you're sitting in an oval at 250 going into turn one and you lose concentration, you're going to hit concrete. And I think that's slightly the difference as well between the concentration levels. There is a little bit of margin on a road course. And, you know, if you clip a curb, you might have some percentage of recovering it. 99.9%, if you lose concentration on an oval, there is no margin. It's going to be an accident. So, you know, the chances of recovery are slim. So I'd say, yeah, listen, oval racing is unique. If anybody wants to go and take the mickey out of it, please don't until you've done it. It's a tough, tough discipline.
I can't imagine why anybody would do that. Geordie Lodge has got his hand in the air.
Frank Warwick wants to know, what's the most scariest racing moment he's ever been in?
Scariest racing moment, Mark?
That would be Rio de Janeiro in 1996 when I had brake failure at 200 miles an hour. So I hit concrete at 198 miles an hour and 122 G impact. So I think it's still on ESPN in America in the top 10 crashes ever. It's you can watch it on YouTube. It's one of those ones you watch it and you think, like, oh, has that been speeded up? And actually, no, it's not. It's real time. It's quite horrific seeing something hit concrete at 200 miles an hour. And I came to a standstill pretty quick, I have to tell you.
Well, yeah, that's some braking. Yeah, absolutely terrifying. So happy that you're still with us. Let's go back to Formula One, because obviously you spent time with Ayrton Senna, and you were the test driver. What was he like? How did he? Can you tell us what made him tick and what made him seem so different to other drivers? Or maybe you didn't think he was.
No. He definitely was, and I think, you know, that's part and parcel of what I'm lucky now to have, is some experience where I sit to give to some younger generation guys, and especially when you've been able to work with guys at the level of Senna. He's like the 1% club. I mean, he was, you know, he's like the Rossi in MotoGP. They're unique. They're genius. And sometimes I would say, like, the ability levels are on par with many, but it's not just about the ability. It's about the whole package, and it's about what sits on the shoulders of those guys. And they just think about things in a slightly different way. They approach things in a slightly different way. I learned from him about making sure that I got a whole team to work for me as opposed to around me. And I think there's a lot of drivers who could take something from that. What I learned also was that you had to be incredibly selfish to get to where you wanted to go. And if I'm being brutally honest, I wasn't selfish enough. And that's what probably held me back. Decisions that I took, I probably looked at them saying, oh, you know, I need to be loyal, I need to do this, I need to do that. And in fact, if I look back now, they were probably the wrong decisions, but it was the only way that I could factor in at that stage. Bearing in mind also that I was slightly different. I was already a father at 21 years old, trying to make.
I was going to say, you were young when you had your family, weren't you?
Yeah, like Junior Blundell just contacted us. Yeah, my first son. You know, and that also puts a different outlook on things. So I think that's something that, you know, you've got responsibilities, you've got your family, you still haven't quite made it, and you're cracking on. So sometimes when decisions needed to be made, they were already sort of involving those processes. But when I look back at Senna, I always remember the first test that I did at McLaren in '92, and it was at Silverstone. And back then, Senna would never be around in that early stage of the season, that pre-season. He'd be off, recovering and recuperating, training. But I was there as a test guy, and about 11 a.m. in the morning, Senna turned up, kind of unannounced. And I was in the car going out and doing laps, came in the garage, and there he was standing there, and he had the headphones on. And he was listening in to my feedback and my understanding of what I was driving. And basically, it was like sort of coming to see what I was up to and making sure that it was correlating on how he would explain a car and understand that what I was telling the engineers was good enough for the job. He stuck around for about another hour and he left. And it was quite fascinating to see he'd gone to that trouble to come and make sure that what was going on, ready for his season, was in capable hands. And actually, it was quite good because, bizarrely, my driving style is quite similar to what Senna used to do in terms of the way that you apply the throttle. And a lot of that, I think, I actually got from being on a motocross bike, because when you went through a berm, you put it in stages of throttle as opposed to just opening it wide open. And a lot of the time, that was quite evident in the way that I drive. Completely troublesome for me when I try to drive a front-wheel drive car, because it doesn't work. People can see that from last year. but it's one of those things. If you have a certain style, it's very difficult to change. And back then it was good. Gerhard Berger's car, I couldn't drive the setup. Senna's setup and my style were very similar in that way, so it worked quite well that year.
Fascinating. I'm interested, when Senna turned up at that point during that test, did you feel like you were a sort of cog in the wheel, or was there any human interaction with him? Was there any emotion from him? Did he go out of his way to speak to you, or was it just, did he just come, take the information he needed and leave? Do you understand what I'm getting at there?
Yeah. Obviously, I knew him already from driving against him the year before and actually doing the testing, with Williams. So I'd got to know him already by that stage. But there was, how can I put it? There wasn't a great amount of interaction with me on a personal level, and I know that now when I look back, because I saw it several times, and I actually was on the front end of it on something else during that season, because there was an element of psychology, because there was always his positioning of where he sat within the team, and where he sat within a team was right at the very top of the pyramid. And in many ways, and I think that's why you saw the power struggle between him and Ron Dennis. I don't think Ron has ever had such a fight on his hands. Maybe Alain Prost gave him a run for his money, but I think Senna, really took it to him to be able to sort of be a team owner and a boss and keep Senna under control, because he was incredibly good at politics, at motivation, at stimulation, manipulation, whatever you want to call it. The guy was unbelievable. And I say, for me, that's what I took away from that season, was what I needed to do outside of a car was just as important as what I did inside a car, and Senna showed me that.
Yeah. This is so interesting. I could just talk to you forever. At the 90s, though, I mean, was it fun in the Formula One paddock, or were you so focused that you couldn't kind of enjoy the fun glam side of Formula One?
No, I mean, it was fun. I mean, obviously it's very professional, and F1 was, I have to say, back then it was probably more close shot than what it is today. And that was actually some of the beauty of going to America. It was a lot more casual and laid back and family orientated, and F1 wasn't quite like that back then. So probably more than anything, I was quite lucky because I spent a couple of seasons with Brad, was my teammate.
Yeah.
And we get on very well, and we would laugh a lot, and we still do today. And I think at the end of it, that made life a little bit easier. Bear in mind, back then I was quite young to be in an F1 car compared to today again. I mean, they come out of a nappy and they're in a car these days. But I think that, it was fun, but it was highly pressured. And all the time, again, differential. I mean, a lot of the time there's a lot of driver activity. You know, you look back then and see the amount of drivers in and out of cars and teams, and you look today and very rarely do you see a driver swap. You know, they're in teams for 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
Some of that's down to now that they don't have the understanding of what they can do on the track because testing is no longer. Some of it now is because it's, you know, a big risk to take one of the youngsters without understanding that capability. Even though simulators are out there, they still don't quite replicate a race environment and how a guy functions in a team. So, yeah, like being a Premier League football manager, you know, there was a lot of shuffling back then.
A lot of shuffling. And your relationship with Martin Brundle, I mean, still to this day, people mix you up. And
I don't know. I'm the younger one.
I don't know how. It's just the similarity, obviously, of the names. But even back in the day, I remember a particular story about a Japanese airline mixing you guys up, and you ended up winning a better seat, didn't you?
Oh, that's a true story. So that's in Japanese, you know, there's characters that are, you know, for the alphabet that match ours. So if you write M Brundle and M Blundell in Japanese on a boarding card, it's spelt the same in Japanese. So of course, me being the little pup and the new boy turning up at the airport 2 hours early because I was in economy, I arrived at check-in and you know, handed over the passport and got checked in and got returned like 1C. So I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. They've recognized me. I've been upgraded. You know, I've made it. So I went off very happy, sitting in a first-class lounge, and then got on the plane and sitting in my nice big comfy seat from Japan to Australia, which I think was about 9 hours flight. And then about half an hour to go, you know, 20 minutes to go, the doorway of the plane stands this red-faced Martin Brundle. And I mean, I've never seen him so red in all my life. So he'd been pushing some steam out. So he's looking across at me and he's like nodding his head and basically telling me to, you know, come over and talk to him and get out of my seat. At the same time, the whole of the Formula One paddock, who was sitting in first class, kind of cottoned on what was going on, started laughing. And the Japanese stewardess asked me to move. And once I sort of went back to her and said, no, that's my name and that's my seat and I'm staying, Brundle sat for 9 hours in, you know, 68F or something. So I never did pay him the difference on that seat.
I absolutely love that story. It's a real cracker. I love Martin as well. And I must say, Martin was very supportive for me when I went to Formula One, despite us being on rival TV channels or seemingly rival TV channels. He was very lovely and offered me quite a high level of support. So got a lot of time for Martin. And I know obviously you two teammates, great friends, business partners over the years. And always a joy and a pleasure to catch up with you both. I'm just going to ask the Geordie Lodger if there's any other questions before I let you go, because I realise I've taken up loads of your time this morning, and thank you so much for popping in. Really appreciate it.
Yes, a lot of people are asking. I'll try this one first. Did you ever think about motorcycle racing?
Oh yeah, because you know, you're a biker. Did you? Well, you obviously did do some racing, but did you ever think about any other motorcycle racing? Would you have fancied it? MotoGP?
I did. So listen, I grew up sort of in the countryside, rural, so I never did go-karts or karting. People get upset when you go go-karts. So, you know, motocross, like scrambling dirt bikes was kind of the in thing at school, and that's what sort of took my my sort of like interest. Also because I was rubbish at school. I mean, I came out of school with no exams whatsoever, so I'm not exactly the most academic guy in the world. So I had a bit of a deal actually with my dad. It was like, look, I'll let you go on a bike on the mud and you can do what you need to do, but I'm not going to let you go on the road. And that's because he had an accident on one in his early years. And it was kind of like, so this is the deal. You do the motocross, but you don't get a road bike.
Okay.
So of course, that didn't really work out, because as soon as I was able to get a license, I got a moped, you know, the little 50cc stuff. And then I then started pushing actually to try and go road racing, but I got blocked out. But I would have loved to have ridden the bike on a track. And one day I will still go and get on one. I keep getting offered to go and do stuff with Mamela and some of the guys.
You should. Absolutely should.
Yeah, Yamaha. they still want me to turn up because obviously I got the first World Championship point and the first podium for Yamaha Motor Company in F1. So they probably still feel they owe me something. They did give me a motorbike and a jet ski, although I'd have preferred a couple of $100,000, but that didn't come out.
Paul Hodgson is saying good morning, Billy. So it would be remiss for you to for me to not say that.
My nickname.
Yeah, your nickname. Why is that your nickname?
I don't know. Been with me since I was at school.
Oh, okay.
Billy Bullshit.
Well, yes. All right, we'll go with that. It
Yeah.
probably is that. Anything else?
Yeah, a lot of people are saying, how did MB Motorsport get on in the BTC launch this season?
Well, we haven't kind of had a season, have we?
No, I mean we've had media day.
Yeah.
So the guys were on track with drivers Jake Hill, Sam Osborne. Both of them did fantastically. Jake was, I think, second quickest overall on the day. You know what it's like. It's media day. Some people could be showboating. Some people could be sandbagging.
Yeah.
But listen, I can't wait for the season to start. It's a different role for me, sporting director. I love touring cars. I think I'm probably going to love them even more from the pit lane rather than sitting inside one, but that's another story. And we'll see what happens. But we've got some great commercial partners with us, and you know, I'm hoping we get a program announced in the very near future. Actually, I'm hearing that the British Touring Cars may be thinking about announcing something in the not too distant future. Okie
dokie. Well, we wish you all the best for that, and you know, hopefully you'll get some racing this year at some point. It's always a joy and a pleasure to catch up with you, Mark. Thanks for your time this morning, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Suzi. Thank you, Geordie Lodger.
You're welcome. Speak to you soon.
Oh no, be beside himself now. Oh, Mark Blundell's been an absolute pleasure, a joy this morning to talk to Mark and to delve back into the archive of Formula One, IndyCar, a bit of Le Mans 24-hour. He says that he came out with no schooling, but a particularly articulate guest I think we had this morning in Mark Blundell. So we salute you, Mark. Thank you very much. And I will tell you this, actually. Mark sent me a message after a couple of breakfast clubs and said, I'd like to come on and chat to you. And I was so cock-a-hoop that somebody was interested in coming on. And it's been really interesting. I hope that you enjoyed that. I know we've gone a little bit longer than we would normally. We've had several sessions of the bells going through.
Yes. Everybody's loving it. Everybody's saying about Goosebumps, best one yet.
Oh, good stuff. Well, let me just tell you that tonight we're going to have a supper club. We're going to do 1 or 2 a week, depending on guests and how we're holding up here. So Colin Edwards, Texas Tornado, will be coming to you live on Instagram tonight, 9 o'clock BST. And hopefully the Gremlins, Tech Gremlins, won't be there like they were last night, even though we could hear Alex. And you can catch up with the chat with Alex. That's still on the live story. So if you want to catch up with that and see what Valentino was spying on last night, then please do that. And we'll put this up afterwards as well. So if you're coming in late, you'll be able to watch this on the stories as well. But it's Wednesday. Have a lovely day. We hope we've lightened your lockdown with a little bit of motorsport royalty this morning, and more motorsport royalty later on with Colin. So from us, from a bit of a grey, windy, leaf blowy kind of Côte d'Azur, have a lovely day. Big kiss to you all.